Capitalism has never done better. The American economy is suffering like never before. I think that's something to keep in mind. Now,
is the problem capitalism or a lack of regulation of capitalism?
I mean, I would say that there's a policy matrix going on, because this is about causes and consequences of U.S. income and inequality. I mean, obviously I couldn't do justice to that in 30 minutes, probably not in 3 days, but I would say there's a policy matrix, so that if you look at fiscal and monetary policy, those are the two standard interventionist measures for the entire economy. But then there's trade, then there's labor, and there's finance, all of these policies. And the income that goes from where you work to then what gets into your pocket, both before and after tax, it has to go through this policy matrix, right? And many people around here, you're probably quite aware with the deregulation of finance, or this word, or the re-regulation of finance in the interest of the banks themselves, and to the detriment of their consumers, to the depositors, and to the public that has to pick up their tab when they recklessly speculate. However, there's a subject that is basically been relatively unexamined in the last 3 years, and in the last few years. I think labor economists specialize in it, but it hasn't been talked about. It's called the deregulation of the labor market. It's this loosening of rules in labor market policy, and the reluctance to enforce rules already on the books. Again, this light touch regulation. So let me give you one characteristic. It blew me away when I learned about this. I think it was just earlier this year. There's a quote. In the United States, you can't be fired or prevented from employment if you're black, if you're handicapped, if you have a certain political ideology. You can't be fired for any of those reasons or prevented from being hired. You can just be fired for any reason. Right?
Here in New Hampshire, we're an at-will state.
Right, and at will,
They
and
don't
that's
have to give you a reason, they can just do it.
right.
I work in the unemployment office, so for the last 20 years, so I know this, and keep going.
Well, no, you're exactly right.
I won't stop.
You're exactly right. I mean,
Other states are different. You're basically right nationwide.
Right.
In this state, we're an at-will state, and we have been forever.
Yeah. The at-will is even a more egregious example of what I'm going to touch on. And what it is, like I said, you can't be fired for one reason or another if they do find out that there's been active discrimination on ethnic or gender basis. You could just be fired in America. And there's an OECD study that I suggest you just look at it. And what they did is they looked at worker protections across the world. 30 of the richest countries, those are the OECD countries, your Switzerland's, your Germany, France, Britain, and then they included 10 developing countries, Mexico, Brazil, Indonesia, Turkey. They looked at 40 countries. The United States is the easiest place in the world to fire workers. The easiest place. There's not one country on the spectrum that it's easier to fire people. Now, that's the one thing you never hear about. You hear about our staggering unemployment rate, and you go, well, why the hell didn't I ever hear about that?
There's so many people unemployed that people are at will. Like,
they're at will.
Fire somebody, there's 10 other people coming in.
Right, and that has a huge impact. Something like that. It's basically been, like I said, relatively unexamined, but I certainly think that being the easiest place in the entire world out of 40 countries, including China, India, Brazil, Mexico, and then the developed European countries and Japan, you can see the impact of this in just the last 3 years, and it's amazing, really. Look over the last 3 years. The United States suffered a blow. It was a global recession, and growth declined and then subsequently recovered, basically at the same rate as Germany. In fact, the only country that had better growth metrics over the last 3 years, suffered less, and then subsequently recovered more, is Canada. So Canada is the only country that had a less severe growth recession, and then a subsequent recovery that puts it basically above us. But that's out of 7 countries in the world: Japan, UK, Canada, France, Germany, the biggest countries. So if you just looked at that across the board and said, "Oh, the U.S. outperformed on growth basis in the last 3 years," I know it's crazy, but the U.S. outperformed on a growth basis all of its other peers. So if growth declines by X, you'd maybe assume that unemployment increases by Y. Almost maybe some kind of standard math. Maybe it's something that could be applied across the world. If growth declines, sales decline, trade declines, then unemployment should rise by so much. Well, Germany had worse growth metrics than we did. They're at a 28-year low in unemployment. If you take the Eurozone as a whole, unemployment from late 2008 to late 2010, that 2-year period, unemployment in Europe only increased by 50%. Only. Now, we outperformed all of them. Our unemployment rate increased 100%. And I think that's directly relatable to these labor market policies that make it easy to fire, easy to shift the burden onto the workers that are remaining, easy to get productivity up, and we have been. You look at the productivity measures from the capitalist point of view, this is great stuff, because in the last 2 years, our productivity outpaced Europe. In the last 10 years, we outpaced all of them. So our productivity is going through the roof. That means workers are contributing more. That's a raw measurement of output and time. How much can you produce per worker per unit of time?
Less we're seeing.
And the less you're seeing. And that's why I never use 19th century dogmas or ideas to communicate the policies that matter to people. It's a fundamentally American idea, and actually it reflects classical economic wisdom, that you get what you put in. They call it marginal productivity in economics, and it basically means that income distribution reflects differential contribution to output. If you got a lot, you probably contributed a lot. If you don't have a lot, you probably didn't contribute. And what I see in the last 3 years and the last 30 is the exact opposite of that. I see worker productivity spiraling, and an attendant wage stagnation. So people contributing more and more and more and more, and getting less and less and less. And there's a corollary to that. The corporations, like I said before, it's not debatable whether they have high record profits. And I know there's sometimes a little disagreement on that, but I think in the papers I passed out, I won't get into it now. I looked at six different metrics of corporate profitability, from after-tax cash retention to corporate profit margins internal to the company, and also the corporate share of overall income in this country. What slice of the pie are they getting? What slice of the pie are workers getting? This has been declining since 2000. It's been declining before that, and it just hits a new low every single year, including this year. 3 months ago, the new data came out. The worker share of income has never been so low. So when you hear sometimes people somewhat confused of why the economy is doing poorly, think to yourself, well, isn't it because the workers are getting the smallest share in U.S. history? It seems pretty straightforward.
A lot of what you said, I've been going to a lot of the GOP candidate events, so I know exactly what they would say in response to some of this. And a lot of what you said has made it clear that regulation is not the problem. They keep on arguing that, the problem, why the economy isn't as good as it could be, is because there's too much regulation. But the fact is, America has so much less regulation than, for instance, Europe and a lot of other places.
Yep.
So it's simply not true.
I have my own opinion like you do. I like to look at the opinions of businessmen because they're available. They do polls. And the businessmen say why they're not creating jobs. It's the National Federation of Independent Businesses, basically the small businesses that politicians always talk about. And their chief concern is lack of sales. When you're in a business, what you're looking for, the determining factors, whether you're going to invest in equipment or hire new workers, is you're going to be looking at the next 3 to 9 months. And you're going to be looking at sales. That's the chief factor, and that's what they're saying. By far, their number one concern, what's holding them back from both hiring and investing, as judged by what the businessmen are saying themselves, is this lack of sales. And why do they have a lack of sales? Well, the people that buy their stuff are making less than ever. And their regulatory concerns are there, but I think they're fourth. They're not even a tertiary concern. You know what's all the way on the bottom, interestingly, and nobody really mentioned it when they always talk about this, the regulation, they always cite it. Somebody says, well, they're not hiring because of regulation, and somebody, maybe from my perspective, I know Krugman talks about it all the time. He'll be like, well, look at this NFIB polls, and he'll show them all the time. But what you don't see is the fifth concern, one of the last concerns of employers, and that's labor costs. They don't care. They're so low, they're not even worried about it. So when you hear about them saying, oh, it's the minimum wage holding them back, it's like, no, that literally, like, if they enumerated it, it'd be the last concern they have. So, I'd say that. And getting back to the corollary between who's contributing and who's extracting wealth, we already went over the workers contributing more and getting less. Well, what about the corporations? Well, I look at it and say, what's the corporate economy's relationship to the national economy? And I say, well, they provide jobs. They provide wages to those people who have jobs. They invest in their companies, and they pay taxes.
They're people too.
Well,
Yeah,
maybe they're...
ask me.
Yeah, I mean, and so all these four things, if you can think of the jobs they provide, the jobs they do provide, what wages they pay, the investment in their companies, and then the taxes they pay. So I started looking at this in about 2010. It was just some kind of scheme that I thought of myself of these four things. There could be others, but I thought those were pretty important. And I looked and I said, well, unemployment's higher than it's been in 30 years. Long-term unemployment is higher than it's been in post-war history. That's really been the biggest single anomaly in this recovery is just the extent of long-term unemployment. It's absolutely unprecedented. So they're providing less jobs than they have in 30 years. Well, what about the wages? Well, like I said, they're getting the biggest slice ever. The wages they pay are one of the lowest ever. 2009 and 2010 saw some of the biggest wage declines, especially 2009. Unit labor costs were going down 6 or 7% at one point. Again, unprecedented. Well, then we look at investment. Well, that's come back in computers and equipment, software and equipment sales. We really lead the world in that, and it's been one bright source of the economy in the last 2 years, that and exports. That's the only good thing you could say. But investing in the economy has suffered from a long-term stagnation. And then the taxes they pay are at a 50-year low. So really, what I'm really trying to say, I guess, is in this economy, if you look at the income distribution, it's not what you put in, but it's what people are willing to let you take. And that's a power relationship. And I think at the heart of this income inequality story is a story of power. It's a story of workers losing power in their workplace and in the political system, at the state legislature and in Washington, D.C. And it's a story of growing corporate power, a concentration of political, economic, and social power. All three of those intimately connected. And that's what I'd say is the story behind this income inequality. It is really a relational story. It's a story between people losing power and people gaining it at their expense. So, if anyone has any questions.